Hello and welcome to Pastor Ty's Christmas themed cultural studies and the gospel accounts of Jesus' birth Bible study extravaganza. You made it. Welcome. You've made it to this thing there's a really long title for some reason. I don't know. But thanks for joining me here for a little bit of a Bible study. And we are going to be looking at some of the cultural conditions that were at play in Jesus' birth narrative in the Bible, taking a look at some of the maybe misconceptions that we as 21st century Americans sometimes place over the Bible story, that we think it in certain terms the way it would be like today, but we forget about sometimes some of the things that take place that are different, so much different than the way that we would view things today. So that's kind of what I'm going to think about. Welcome, glad to have you. Merry Christmas to you. I'm wishing that there was more snow outside. But you know, what are you going to do? What are you going to do? Right? So we'll be glad for each day. The coronavirus numbers are kind of continue to be high in Minnesota, and so this is a way for me to connect with you in the church and maybe others online who are watching, and provide this for you. So I want to think about the birth story of Jesus, and we're going to actually go with me to the book of Luke, if you will. Turn to the book of Luke. Grab a Bible, grab one, or have it on your phone or a computer or whatever you can find. But Luke chapter 2 is probably the most familiar portion of the Bible story of Jesus' birth. Matthew also has an account of Jesus' birth. That one's I would say not as well known as the one from Luke. Luke has a lot more details surrounding, and so we're going to spend some time in Luke today. We'll get to Matthew later on, but today, Luke chapter 2, we're going to read verses 1 through 6, and not only am I going to read it for you, but I'm actually going to act it out for you through some friends of mine that I have here with me. And so I'm going to read it out, and then I'm actually going to have Joseph and Mary help me out, and we're going to act out for you how this works. Okay, so this is I'm gonna do this, and I'm gonna act it out in the way that it is traditionally understood by 21st century Americans. Okay, so here it comes. Ready? Luke chapter 2. In those days, a decree went out from Caesar Augustus that all the world should be registered. This was the first registration when Quirinius was governor of Syria, and all went to be registered, each to his hometown. Mary, so I got this letter in the mail, and it says that we have to go back to my hometown, and register for the census. Oh, that's nice. I'm pregnant. Oh, yeah, I forgot about that. Yeah, you're pregnant. Oh, that's too bad. That's too bad. Yeah, how are we going to do it? Well, we can take my donkey. Take my donkey. Okay. And back to verse 4. Joseph also went up from Galilee, from the town of Nazareth to Judea, to the city of David, which is called Bethlehem, because he was of the house and the lineage of David, to be registered with Mary, his betrothed, who was with child. Okay, let's go. Okay, we made it back. You better hurry up, though, because you are going to give birth at any minute. Oh, I know. I can feel him. He's coming, going to be coming soon. Yes, quick, let's hurry up and get a place to stay. Oh no. It appears there's no room at the hotel. And it says in verse 6, and while they were there, the time came for her to give birth. Oh no, what are we going to do? There's no room at the hotel. go. We better find something quick. I can feel him coming up now. Oh, let's go over to this barn over here. Quickly, let's go. That was a very accurate representation, don't you think? I really thought the voice acting was excellent work, if I don't say so myself. I think the accent, Joseph's accent, was right on target with that. So a couple things about that. Was there any part of that that made you kind of think, it sounds right, maybe not, I don't know, the accent for sure was wrong, but I want to think about how this actually would have played out in terms of what was going on. Now, one of the things that comes to us when we think about this account is that it all took place really quickly, right? I read these 6 verses and you kind of read them through. It only takes you about 20 seconds to read it through, and you think, man, that all happened really fast. And Mary gave birth quickly, right? But that's not necessarily the case. In fact, not only that, but Joseph and Mary would not have been in a hurry. It would not have been in a hurry. There's no indication in this passage that they were in a hurry. The other thing that's at play here, and I'm going to get to, is this idea of them having to stay at a hotel or wanting to stay at some type of a hotel, and there was no room, which is actually what it does say in verse 7. I didn't read that, but it says there was no place for them in the inn. I want to think about the ancient culture, and particularly the hospitality of ancient culture. Something that we don't necessarily understand very well, and I'll admit I don't. But here's what I understand about ancient culture is that hospitality was a big deal, and that a hotel, so to speak, in the way that we think of it today, were very rare. And they would have only been in some of the larger cities. And Bethlehem was a very small town. And so they would have been very strange for them to have any type of a lodging area for visitors. And so what inevitably would have been the case is for Joseph and Mary would have come much in advance of when Mary was due. And they very likely would have stayed with one of their relatives. After all, this was one of Joseph's hometown. Possibly Mary's hometown as well. But it's very clear that we know that Joseph was from the line of David, and that's why they had to go to Bethlehem, which was the city of David, as it mentions there in verse 4. And so they traveled and very likely would have stayed with one of their relatives. And even if they didn't have any relatives, it would have been very common for Joseph, being from the lineage of David, to have been received by even a stranger into their home. That would have been a very common thing to take place, that they would have stayed in the home of somebody there in Bethlehem. And particularly the fact that Mary was pregnant, and we know also that women would have been very fond of wanting to take care of the pregnant woman. They would have wanted to give her special attention to make sure she was very comfortable and have a place to stay. This idea that they were turned away or that they didn't have any place to stay is a misnomer and is kind of just a misconception. I'm actually going to spend some time thinking more about the place that they stay next week, so I'm going to kind of leave that be for now. We're going to think about the place they stayed next week particularly, but I want to kind of just think about that they very likely would have stayed with a relative. In fact, if you go back even into Luke chapter 1 and verse 39, where that's the story of Elizabeth, I should say Mary going to visit her cousin Elizabeth. And it says in verse 39, in those days, Mary arose and went with haste into the hill country. There it does say with haste, going quickly. This is right after she receives the news about how she's going to give birth to Jesus. And Mary goes to and says, into the hill country, a town in Judah. Bethlehem was a town in Judah in the hill country. And so it's very likely that this was a nearby area of Bethlehem. If it wasn't Bethlehem, it was nearby, that very likely they could have stayed with Elizabeth, or at least another relative that would have been nearby. Would make much more sense in an ancient cultural context. So there's no idea of this late night arrival and they get there late and there's no place for them to stay. That's a very common misconception. It actually comes from a book that is not in the Bible. It comes from a book called the Gospel of James. And the Gospel of James is a book that was written about the year 200 AD. Much later, about 200 years after Jesus' story. The book of Luke was written only about the year 60 AD, and it was written Luke says at the very beginning of chapter 1 that he wrote everything down on account of eyewitnesses that witnessed these things. And if you were to compare what Luke writes about this story, it fits with the way that we understand the geography of ancient Israel. In fact, it says that they traveled from Nazareth to Bethlehem. And in verse 4, it says Joseph went up from Galilee, from Nazareth to Judah. And that would have made sense because you go up into the hill country of Judah. Bethlehem was up in the mountainous area, so they would have gone up, right? It matches well the idea of the city of David being the city of Bethlehem. It was commonly called that. That's also true. And this fact that they would have wrapped baby Jesus in swaddling clothes is also a very common ancient practice. So all that to say is that when we look at the account found in Luke, it's very historically accurate. It matches with what we would expect and understand about the people and places that it talks about. You compare that to the Gospel of James, which I mentioned earlier, this other book that was written much, much later on. The Gospel of James isn't historically accurate, and it doesn't actually even indicate that it knows what it's talking about sometimes. For example, part of this book of Gospel of James talks about how Mary and Joseph travel on the road from Nazareth to Bethlehem, and they say that it's a road that is in the middle of the desert. But yet we know that that road was not in the middle of the desert, but instead would have been a part of an area that had full of rich farmland. And so there's doubts about this Gospel of James and how true it actually is. But that account of the Gospel of James, in fact, if you were to go on, you could go online and find the Gospel of James and read it if you wanted to. But in the story is where we get this idea of Jesus being born on the night of his parents' arrival in Bethlehem. And it's just kind of interesting to think about how we're influenced by some of these non-biblical ideas, even today. And so really to summarize, what we know about ancient culture is that Joseph would have returned to his home village to find shelter, and he would have been easy for him to find that and very much ahead of time. And there would have been plenty of time for them to arrange and find a suitable housing. And so that's kind of the way that we would want to think about this. And so what's my point in all this? Why am I talking about this? Well, I tend to think that it's very much of our American way for us to think that people were always in a hurry, because we're always in a hurry, right? Think of Mary and Joseph, right? Woo-hoo, yeah, they are always in a hurry. Because we're always in a hurry. We're standing in line at the checkout. You got to stand 6 feet apart right now, or at least you're supposed to. And I mean, it just takes forever, right? I mean, hurry up. You know, why? You know, you got 15 items in the 12 items or less lane. What's the deal, lady? It's just, we're always in a hurry. In fact, you're probably thinking, Pastor, would you please finish this Bible study video extravaganza because I got other things to do, right? Yeah, hurry up. Hurry up. Well, I'm here to say that, well, maybe this Christmas, we don't need to be in a hurry. In fact, you know, the coronavirus numbers the way they are, a lot of events have been canceled this Christmas that otherwise would be taking place. Maybe we can use this month to do just that and slow down. I know we've kind of already been slowed down in a lot of ways this year, but even this Christmas, again, we can remind ourselves, take some time and slow down and be thankful for what we have. Find some time to read scripture. Maybe you could take December and say, I'm going to read through the entire book of Luke, or maybe read through another book of the Bible or a section of the Bible. So I'm going to read through and just spend time in prayer, spend time reading the Word of God, and spend time with loved ones, with family that you can, and just learn to appreciate the time we have, be thankful for God sending His Son and what Christmas means, of course. And so that's a challenge for me and challenge for all of us to slow down and to prepare our hearts for the birth of a King who came for us. So that's all I have for today. Next week, again, we're going to think more about what that phrase, no room in the inn, means, because there's some more misconceptions around that. But for now, Merry Christmas to you and Happy New Year. And the donkey says, goodbye, sayonara, see you later.